Just out of curiosity, who here is like me and like does not mind or maybe even loves a canceled plan? Is there anybody in here that loves? Yeah, there it is. Oh, wow. Of course. This is my place. These are my people. I expected maybe like two of you to raise your hand. I absolutely, unequivocally love a canceled plan. If you could tell me that we are going to Disneyland, I'm paying for all of it, you're going to go there, and I'm going to give you a promotion while you're there, and if you canceled it right before, I'd be like, this is the greatest day ever. It feels like freedom when someone goes, I can't make it. What we're talking about today is actually a story in Scripture that has to do with that feeling of a canceled plan. And the person in it is not like you or I who loves that canceled plan. It doesn't go exactly according to plan. And there's a tension there. And what I want to work with today is that tension, that feeling of what happens when it doesn't work out the way that I think it should. Right? And that's really the sentence I'm interested in, that I think it should. I'm the recovery pastor here at New Abbey, and so I deal a lot, and not just in this job, but in other jobs that I have with people who are in recovery. I'm in recovery myself. And one of the biggest tensions there is I had a life that I thought was going to go this direction completely. Like, I had it all mapped out. I got all the degrees. I did all the things, and it absolutely didn't happen. So what do I do when I'm standing with this life I hoped to build and it just doesn't work out, right? What do we do with pain? What do we do with trauma? All of these different things. And the good news is there's tons and tons of direction for us, especially in the book of Mark, which we've been slowly crawling through. We're at chapter 5 right now, and I believe next week we'll be at chapter 6, so look at that. We've been doing this since January. But here's the passage I want to focus on, and it's a big one. Corey left and gave me 40 scripture verses to do, so I was like, oh, thank you. So we're going to work through this kind of chunk by chunk. It says, when Jesus again crossed over the boat to the other side of the lake, and this is really key information right at the beginning here. What we're getting here is not just language, that's just information. This is poetic, this is symbolism, and what it's saying is Jesus is coming back from something. He's coming back from the other side. He's actually coming back sort of home. A large crowd was gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. So that's also a really big note, just to put some pins in this, like that big sort of meme of Charlie from It's Always Sunny kind of getting the Bible done. This here is a synagogue leader, a synagogue ruler, as it's translated in some other places. So this isn't just a religious person. This is actually a leader in the community that has shown up. And to just provide some context here, the people that Jesus has been roaming with, because they've literally been going from like town to town, village to village, these people are in this modicum of like, oh my gosh, we're following this new idea. So what Jesus is teaching is all of this unheard of stuff, that he's twisting things, he's moving things in new realities, and we're really excited to follow this guy, but we're also following this guy in a way that makes us virtually like houseless. We're not really getting paid anything, and we're on the move, right? So for a moment here, when the synagogue ruler shows up, when this big-time voice shows up, there has to be some kind of moment within all of those disciples and all those people following going, we did it. We made it to the big time. Like, this is it. The person is coming. This is going to make all of this legitimate, right? It's not just going to be this free-willing circus of this guy going from town to town. Now we have a chance to put down some roots. Now this thing could actually be something. And something really interesting happens when this person comes. They fall at Jesus' feet, which is this huge sign of respect, saying, like, I don't have any control over my current situation. I'm relenting control, and I'm trying to see if you can help me. So he pleaded with him earnestly, my little daughter is dying. Please come and put hands on her so that she will be healed and live. So Jesus went with him, and a large crowd followed him and pressed around him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all that she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. Because she thought, if I can just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him, and he turned around in the crowd and asked, who touched my clothes? You see the people crowding against you, his disciples answered, and yet you still ask, who touched me? But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, the same thing that synagogue ruler did. Now I'm falling at my feet in front of Jesus. Trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, daughter, your faith has been healed. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering. While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus to the synagogue leader. Your daughter is dead, they said. Why bother the teacher anymore? We're going to stop right there. That's long enough already. There's a huge thing that's happened here, right? One is just a normal Bible story. Someone comes up to Jesus and says, here's my problem. And Jesus goes, cool, let's go solve that problem. Come with me. And starts walking towards that individual's home. And the relief that must be going through Jairus. Like, I don't know if he knew what Jesus was capable of. I don't know if he knew that there'd be immediate healing. All he's looking for is some semblance of hope because his daughter is dying. And then all of a sudden this person comes around and says, okay, yeah, we can deal with that. Can you imagine the hope that you'd be filled with? Like, oh my gosh. In a similar way, I can remember all of these different times in my life, in my journey of recovery, where I would check into a treatment center, or I would go and see a new doctor, I'd go and see a new therapist, I'd go and see a new quote-unquote specialist, and my family would be absolutely filled with hope. Wow, he's got this new sponsor. I'm sure it's all going to work out now. Oh, he went to this place, he did 30 days, now he's in a sober living. Hopefully this time it'll stick. And all these times that they were filled with hope, something else came into the trajectory, mostly me, and messed with that plan. So all of the tension of that hope of what could be, something comes in and actually throws that in a really big way. In AA, we have this saying that says, religion is for people who are scared of hell, and then spirituality is for people who have gone through hell. Thank you. It wasn't mine. What I see in this story are two different sides of that coin. I see one religious leader who fully and fundamentally understands what it is to approach this from the religious sense. The way he approaches Jesus is an approach of honor. He bows at his feet. He does everything by the book. And then he invites him into his home, right? That is a religious person, a religious leader playing it by the book and doing it by the rules. And then you have another person who has literally been through hell. I'd like to point out, in that scripture, Jairus has a name, right? And I'm probably mispronouncing it. But that is his name. This unnamed woman does not have that. She's completely unnamed up until the point that Jesus heals her and then calls her daughter. Daughter. So in a sense, this profound healing provides a new name for this person. But this person had been through hell. It said that she'd spent all the money that she had on doctors, different environments, different options. I did a deep dive to try and find out what some of these medical things would be for somebody who is dealing with something like this. One, you were already double taxed in this society, right? So you had to pay stuff to Rome, you had to pay stuff to the temple, and then you had your own daily living expenses. You also had a local government that you owed taxes to. And then on top of that, she would have been paying for medical care. And the medical care, honestly, really looked like this. There's a scenario that I read in which one of the solutions was that the woman would hold a glass of wine like this on her hand. The doctor would then leave the room. And then the goal was for the doctor to come back in the room and frighten the woman. And if the glass fell, the woman was healed. And if she was still holding the glass, the woman was still sick and it would require more money to get her healed. Can you imagine how ridiculous you would feel if you walked in and that's the solution that someone offered you? Once when I was in a really bad spot in my addiction and in my unwellness. And I was a pastor at that point, so my story is very weird. This goes alongside me being a pastor and starting a church in Santa Monica. And I had a meeting with someone on Montana Avenue, which is near where my wife and I used to live. We had this meeting, and the meeting went well, but I had woken up and I wasn't feeling quite myself. And we got up from that meeting, and I started walking, and I got about halfway down the block, and then my arms and my legs totally lost feeling. I felt like I couldn't feel my arms, I couldn't control my arms, and I was walking, but I couldn't feel anything in my legs. And in my brain, my brain went to, oh no, this is it. like, I'm going to have to get honest because something is truly now very, very wrong. And the only answer for this is the way that I have been drinking personally in my own life. Like, there's no other medical explanation. And I'm the only person that really knows that. So I call Chelsea, my wife, and I'm like, can you please pick me up? I need to go to urgent care, maybe the emergency room, I'm not sure. And we get to the urgent care, and I have this huge come to Jesus moment with the doctor. He walks in the door, and I say, Doc, I think I'm an alcoholic. And he went, I don't know what to do with that information. But he looked at me, and he goes, well, what are you drinking? I explain everything. I go through it all. And then he goes, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you Xanax for the pain, and then I just want you to drink a lot of Gatorade. And then there was a long silence, and I went, okay, and then what? And he goes, oh, that's all I got for you. That was it. That was the full explanation of, okay, here's how you can get out of this terrible, awful moment, right? And to be fair, that's not really his job, but at the same time, that solution was not something that brought me any sort of hope, any sort of like promise. It was just sort of like, I guess this is the Wild West here. I don't know who knows what's really going on. And that's the way that Jairus must have been feeling as he sees Jesus fully heal this woman, right? Oh my gosh, I thought we had a plan here. I thought he knew what he was doing, and now he's going sideways, and he's dealing with this other person. He's probably completely forgotten about my narrative and who I am. And that's where we pick up in the scripture here. So let's keep going in that. There we go. He did not let, can we go one slide further over? There you go. Overhearing what they had said, and I'll remind you, the slide before this was them saying that your daughter has now died. Responding to what he said, Jesus told him, don't be afraid, just believe. I'll just let that settle for a second. He did not let anyone follow him except for Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. Oh, next slide. There we go. When he came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and he said to them, why is all this commotion? Why all this wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep. When they laughed at him, but they laughed at him, and after he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him, and he went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and he said to her, Talitha cum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around, and she was 12 years old. At this, they were all completely astonished. So what we have here is reconciliation of this story. We have a moment where the plan goes off the path, and then it returns to the path. And then something happens that's absolutely, completely unexpected, which is that Jesus actually raises this girl from the dead, above and beyond what anybody thought was possible at this point. Jesus has done nothing like this in his ministry so far, right? And so the thing I was struck with all week as I was trying to, get a hold of this sort of infuriating narrative where there are 9 different stories going everywhere, is that maybe the fact that I'm so infuriated with all of these 9 different stories going everywhere is kind of the point. Maybe that's what it's actually supposed to bring us to, that we are already reading this text frustrated with the way that God acts. Some of us are like, wait, can't you? All right, well, you should take a team over to that person's house, and then maybe you stay here. There's none of that, right? There's also this profound lack of anxiety in this story, where you notice that one particular thing about Jesus that I love and doesn't get talked about enough is just the calm, cool, collected attitude that he walks through the world with. That there is no panic moment where he's like, oh my gosh, we got to go over here, now you got to go over here. There's just this very relaxed, hey, don't listen to that, just believe. Don't be afraid, just have faith is how it's translated in most scripture. Don't be afraid, just have faith. And I don't know, most of you, even when I read that line and we just let it hang there for a second, there were some chuckles in the room, right? There was some that's not great advice sort of a feeling, right? That's trite advice, or maybe it's a little bit too on the nose. Don't be afraid, just have faith. I was handed a lot of that in my early evangelicalism as an answer. In therapy speak, we call that spiritual bypassing. It's going around the problem and just saying, don't worry about that. God's just going to take care of all of that in between. You just go and be your own self, and God's just going to take care of it for you. At least what I've learned in my own life is that the only way through something is through something. That we can't actually bypass anything or go around anything. And I think this moment between Jesus and Jairus is more him saying, listen, we're going to have to go through something. It's not just going to be this quick whip around and your daughter is going to be fine. We're actually going to have to walk through some life together, but I promise you, it's going to be all right. Don't be afraid. Just have faith. Going back to that quote about religion being something for people who are scared of hell and spirituality being something for people who have walked through it. It's profoundly different when somebody who has walked through some sort of disorienting dilemma, some sort of storm themselves, some sort of hell, when they offer that type of advice, you tend to listen in a different way. I think that's the absolute beauty of the Christian narrative, is that we do not have a God who refuses to suffer. We have a God that at the end of this story suffers greatly, who actually walks through hell. And so the reason I can trust Jesus in that moment is because I know this man has gone through something. So when he says, don't be afraid, just have faith, there's more weight behind those words than there is for anybody else. 2 years ago now, I had about a year of sobriety, and my life was starting to come back together. So if you know anybody in early recovery, if you're in early recovery yourself, that first year is a really sort of hairy, sketchy time. Just in terms of, like, you have to be disciplined, you have to be on it, you have to do a lot of work on yourself, just discovering yourself. And it's a really trying time. It takes a lot of energy, and to everyone else in the world, it looks like you are doing almost nothing, right? And yet there's a lot of this self-discovery that's going on. There's also, like, the inability to really get a great job that pays super well and can just sort of erase all the debt that recovery sort of brings upon you. And so in the first year of my recovery, all I was focused on was, how can I pay this money back? In my own particular journey, in my own particular version, we had some really sketchy stuff go on with the first sober living that they were at, and they basically took advantage of my grandparents. They helped drain my parents' retirement a little bit. There's some really sketchy things that went on financially that I felt responsible for, because I was in those spaces that I was like, I need to be able to pay my parents, my grandparents. I need to make sure that all of this is taken care of, because I can't deal with this tension in my life. And even more on a personal level, this is where we just get to some very vulnerable, honest stuff here. But coming out of that recovery journey, I wasn't able to work. I wasn't able to provide. So we were pretty much like a number that I am even uncomfortable, and you know how vulnerable I usually am on stage, a number I am even uncomfortable sharing with you all in terms of how much credit card debt we were in. And so there's just this pressure to get back on track, to get the job that I needed, to get life moving. And I was so infuriated at every step that I thought this was going to happen, and then it didn't, right? Have you ever been in a position where you're about to rent a new place, or lucky you in Los Angeles, California, if you're about to buy a new place, but if you walk into that place and you tour that place and your life gets filled with hope and you're like, I'm going to live here. I can see myself making coffee on that counter over there, and my kids will play in this room over here. And you leave that space and you already are creating narratives for yourself, and then you get that email that, oh, the place is gone or somebody else took it, right? There's this huge moment where your internal plane sort of takes off with hope, and then it's dashed, right? And there were all of these sort of false start moments for me in my first year of recovery, where I would think, oh my gosh, this is it. I'm getting back on track. Things are going to happen. And then it wouldn't be it. The key example for me was this moment. So I got hired by a friend of a friend to help start an IOP. If you've been around recovery, an IOP is an intensive outpatient. It's like a fancy word for a therapist's office, basically, but it's completely sort of geared towards people in recovery. So you would come in there, you could still work a job, but you would be in recovery classes, quote unquote, from sort of 9 to 3 p.m., and then you'd be able to go out and sort of live your life. And this friend of a friend that I knew, was starting one of these, and he knew that I could use a computer and could do some web stuff, and so I got involved with him doing that. But my true heart, my passion, the whole thing that I wanted to do the minute I got into recovery was I took a look around and I went, oh my gosh, I would love to help in this somehow. Like, if I could work in this, that would be such a beautiful reality. And the way that God kind of led me in that, and then I kind of led myself in that, was that I was a pastor before. Maybe there's something spiritual that I can get into. And the real thing that helped me in my recovery, that actually turned me around, was meeting a spiritual director. Has anybody done any spiritual direction in here? Just a show of hands, curiosity. Yeah, it's in Protestant spaces, it's not as prominent. If you grew up Catholic, you've heard of spiritual direction all day long. If anyone has ever read Richard Rohr is a spiritual director, and that's like part of what he does. So it's a little bit like therapy in the way that you are speaking back and forth, but it's like absolutely nothing like therapy in the way that you are not speaking as the spiritual director. You're actually coaxing the other person to speak about their journey. You're offering images. You're listening deeply, but you're not offering advice. And when I found someone like this, his name was Richard, I was able to sit with Richard, and it really, really unlocked almost everything in me. It drew these connection points between like my church experience and my recovery experience in ways that I had never seen before. And I was like, oh my gosh, if I could do this work in the world, this would be the most fulfilling thing ever, right? So I was constantly looking for places to do that. I was leading these groups within like sober living communities, and then maybe the occasional treatment center in Malibu would hire me to come in and maybe lead a group or something. But it was really at the very, very start of all this. And so when this guy hires me, and he said, okay, well, you've done the website. We want to keep you around. What else can you do? And I was like, well, I can do this like spiritual direction thing. I'm not sure if you need that. And he's like, no, we don't need that. Let's think of something else. How about admin? And I went, admin? I don't know how to use my own Google Calendar, but I was in a position where I did not have a paycheck, and I was like, I can do admin. I've done admin for a long time. So I signed up for an admin position, and I shared with you all at the beginning of this, I have ADHD. Like, scheduling, canceled plans are my favorite thing. Scheduling is not going to be a huge, like, win for me. And it turned out very quickly that was really apparent. Like, we were sending out schedules, and there were weird typos on those, and people were making it to sessions that they weren't supposed to be making it to, and I saw my job quickly disappearing, going like, I cannot do this. And yet, internally, fighting myself, thinking, I have to hold on to this. This is all I have. So no matter what, I need to figure this out. I operated like a very, very wild person. I had like different notebooks for different things. If my boss entered the room, I had a notebook that I would open. I would write down verbatim everything he would say so that I knew I would not forget anything. And my notes would be so meticulous, I realized I wasn't actually listening to him. And so I would miss things and people would get things. So long story short, I know my job is on the line. There have already been very tense conversations between me and Mike, this boss. And a really large client is coming in. In IOPs, we have the same sort of thing you all have in like the entertainment industry. Those people from the entertainment industry, they come to our IOPs. So this person was coming in, and they were a big name, and it was a big deal for us. And it was a big deal for my boss, essentially. They came in, and when they came in, I realized, right when they went through the door, that, oh my goodness, I scheduled them, but I did not schedule the clinician that is supposed to be with them at this very pivotal, thank you, yes, it's that big of a deal. At this very, very big moment, there's going to be no one to meet with this person. And we're there, right? So she walks through the door. I look at Mike. He looks at me. And we greet her. We get her a cup of coffee. And then I walk into the other room with Mike, and I go, guess what, man? There is no one coming for her. And he looks at me like he wants to take my head off, number one, completely fair. And then number two, he kind of turns his head to the side, and he goes, hey, man, what about that spiritual direction thing you told me about? And I went, the spiritual, he's like, can you just meditate or something? Like, can you go do a meditation with this person? And I was like, yeah, I can absolutely do a meditation with this person. We went into the office. We did the meditation. We hit it off on a really great, amazing level. And that person left that office, pulled Mike into his office and said, I would like to be on that clinician's schedule every week, 3 times a week. And with that, my life completely changed. More clients started coming in, that business started taking off, and I got fired from the admin position. But now I work there full-time doing spiritual direction with people in recovery, one-on-one. I never expected for that story to turn out like that. Every step of that journey, I was fighting with God, the universe, energy, whatever it is, because it wasn't happening on my terms. Nothing was happening on my terms. I wanted this at this point in my life. I think the frustrating thing about transformation and doing the work of transformation is we don't get to take that old person with us to experience the new gifts that we get once we've been transformed. So that old person never gets to experience all of those joys, all of that stuff. And I was trying to drag that old person into this new reality. And what I realized is if I got everything that I wanted, everything, it absolutely would have been for the wrong guy. It would have been for someone back there who did not have the capacity to carry what God was prepared to give. I'll end with this. Rewinding to when I did drink, my wife and I went on this amazing trip to Napa. We had friends that were involved. It was like a work friend through a friend. They worked for Ralph's, and so they were like the alcohol distributors for Ralph's. So if you go to Napa with those people, like those wineries want them in there so badly. They want them to stick around. They were cooking us dinners. It was, for an alcoholic like myself, this was absolute heaven. Like, I'm not even joking you. We were on a bus. We were going to these different places. I was drinking all day. It was magical. We did this very last winery, and that winery was called Inglenook. Has anyone heard of Inglenook? If you have, yep, there you go. If you have, Inglenook is like the jug wine that's on the very bottom of the barrel, right? So I had heard of Inglenook. I was like, oh, Inglenook, yeah, I know that. What happened with Inglenook is that Inglenook is actually one of the oldest wineries in America. It survived Prohibition by turning itself into a winery that only produced communion wine for churches. And that's how it made it through, right? And it lost. Before that, it was one of the premier wineries in Napa. It had one of the best reputations, and because it had to survive Prohibition, it went through the mud, and the only way that it could come out of that was being the bottom of the barrel jug wine, right? And so we're at a dinner. They've invited us to this thing. They give us a tour of the property, and we're sitting. And this amazing French man who had been hired, Francis Ford Coppola bought the winery and hired this guy to basically like transform it. Like, I want this to be what it used to be. I want you to restore it to its former glory. And so this incredible, handsome French man was touring us around with a glass of red, swirling it the whole time and giving us all this information about the wine and all this history. And I was like, this man is so incredible. This is an amazing, like, deal. And we sit down for dinner, and I see that there's an empty seat right next to me, and this handsome French man sits down right next to me. And I go, oh my goodness, what am I going to talk about with the head of this winery? At the time, I was like 28 years old, and I had just started being a pastor. And if you have a history in ministry, if you've worked in that way, if you bring that up at a party, it works one of two ways. One, somebody goes, okay, cool. And they're out because they don't want to talk to you at all, which is a very fine reaction. The other reaction is almost worse, which is, oh my gosh, you're a pastor. I want to talk to you about everything. And then every detail about the other side of Christianity comes out. I'm like, I don't know that. And so I was like, I don't really want to gauge this with this person. Like, I know one of those two things is going to happen, but I had nothing else to talk about. So he goes, what do you do for a living? And I was like, I'm a pastor. He quickly turns away. So I was like, well, there goes that. But then he turns back, and we start talking a little bit. And I decided to ask a question because I was curious about it the whole time. I asked him, I went, hey, man, how long do you think it's going to take Inglenook from that bottom shelf to that top shelf? Because he said that maybe 50 times during the tour. We're going to go from the bottom shelf to the top shelf. And he did it in a French accent, not a 1920s New Yorker. But bottom shelf to the top shelf, bottom shelf to the top shelf. And when I asked him that, he didn't even blink. All he said was, oh, I will never see that. And I went, you'll never see that? He goes, no. The job of a winemaker when they take over a winery is not to plan 5 years ahead. It's not to plan 10 years ahead. Minimum, we plan 50 years into the future. 50 years into the future. And I thought about that on a level of myself. I don't plan that far for myself, that far in advance. I don't provide that much care in my own life. If there's a handsome French winemaker who's caring that much about grapes in a barrel, then the creator of the universe, this huge God thing, it has to care about me at least on that level. And at least have some semblance of an idea of what this life is doing and where it is going, and not 5 years and not 10 years, but maybe even 50 years, maybe even more than that into the future. Sometimes we just don't have the capacity to see even 2 weeks in front of us. God has that longer tail view. So, with that, you're going to get back in your groups, and you're going to go on this question. What are small ways that you can practice faith?